My family expected me to raise my sister's 3 kids while she lived it up, then had the audacity to demand I buy her a house after blowing their entire retirement fund on her when I refused to pay. They said they'd sue me for everything I have everyone. My name is Jennifer. I'm 35 years old, and today I'm going to tell you about how my family tried to turn me into an unpaid nanny and ATM machine for my irresponsible sister, and how their demands eventually escalated to the point of threatening to sue me for refusing to buy her a house. This is a story about favoritism, entitlement, boundaries, and the moment I finally said enough is enough. I never thought my own parents would choose my sister's comfortable lifestyle over basic fairness, but here we are. And I'm done being the family doormat. Let me start by giving you some background about my relationship with my younger sister, Melissa. We're 3 years apart, and from the time we were kids, it was clear that Melissa was the favorite child. She was the baby, the fun one, the social butterfly who always had friends around and knew how to charm our parents into giving her whatever she wanted. I was the responsible one, the straightest student who never caused trouble, who helped around the house without being asked, who always did the right thing. And like in so many families, being responsible meant I was taken for granted while Melissa's endless drama and demands took center stage. This dynamic continued into adulthood. I went to college on scholarships and worked part-time to cover my expenses because my parents said they couldn't afford to help me much. I graduated with a degree in accounting, got a job at a good firm, worked my way up over the years, and eventually started my own successful accounting practice. I saved money, invested wisely, bought a modest but nice house, and built a stable, comfortable life for myself. I'm not wealthy by any means, but I'm financially secure and proud of what I've accomplished through my own hard work. Melissa, on the other hand, dropped out of community college after 1 semester. Worked sporadic retail jobs that she would quit whenever she felt like it, and spent most of her 20s partying and dating a series of unreliable guys. By the time she was 25, she had 3 children by 2 different fathers, neither of whom stuck around or paid consistent child support. My parents, instead of encouraging Melissa to get her life together, enabling her to take responsibility for her choices, simply stepped in to rescue her over and over again. They paid her rent, bought her groceries, covered her car payments, paid for daycare when she occasionally decided to work, and basically funded her entire existence while she continued to make poor decisions. The babysitting situation started about 6 years ago when Melissa's youngest was just a baby. Melissa called me one Friday evening, crying about how she desperately needed a break and asked if I could watch the kids for the weekend. She made it sound like she was on the verge of a breakdown, like she needed this time to rest and recover. Being the caring sister I thought I was supposed to be, I agreed. That weekend turned into a regular thing. Every few weeks, Melissa would need me to take the kids, sometimes for a night, sometimes for an entire weekend, occasionally for even longer periods. At first, I didn't mind too much. I love my nieces and nephew. They're innocent kids caught in the middle of their mother's chaos, and I wanted to help, but I started to notice a pattern. Melissa wasn't using this free child care to rest or look for better employment or work on bettering herself. She was using it to go out to bars, parties, concerts, weekend trips with her latest boyfriend, basically living like she didn't have 3 kids at home who needed her. Meanwhile, I was canceling my own plans, spending my weekends feeding, entertaining, and caring for 3 energetic children, and using my own money to buy them food, activities, and anything else they needed during their stays. Melissa never offered to reimburse me for expenses, never really thanked me properly, and started treating my free babysitting service as an entitlement rather than a favor. My parents not only knew about this arrangement, they actively encouraged it. When I started to push back, saying I needed some weekends for myself, they would guilt-trip me with lines like family helps family and those children need stability and you're so good with them. Melissa really depends on you. They never seemed to consider that maybe Melissa should depend on herself, or that maybe their constant enabling was preventing her from growing up and taking responsibility. They never seemed to care that I had my own life, my own needs, my own desire to have weekends free to date, travel, or simply relax after working 60-hour weeks building my business. The breaking point with the babysitting came about 2 years ago. Melissa asked me to watch the kids for what she said would be a long weekend while she attended a friend's wedding out of state. I reluctantly agreed. But then that long weekend turned into a week, then 10 days. She stopped answering my calls and texts. I had to take time off work, cancel client meetings, and completely rearrange my life to accommodate her children. When she finally came back, I discovered she hadn't been at a wedding at all. She had gone on a vacation to Mexico with her newest boyfriend, posting pictures on social media the entire time, living it up on the beach while I was dealing with her parental responsibilities. I was furious. I told Melissa that I was done being her free babysitter, that she needed to figure out her own child care, and that she couldn't keep abandoning her kids to party like a teenager. She immediately went crying to our parents, painting me as the cruel, selfish sister who was abandoning her in her time of need. My parents called me, absolutely livid, telling me I was being heartless, that Melissa was struggling as a single mother and needed family support, that I should be ashamed of turning my back on my own nieces and nephew. I tried to explain about the Mexico trip, about the years of taking advantage, about how this arrangement was enabling Melissa's irresponsibility, but they didn't want to hear it. In their eyes, Melissa could do no wrong, and I was just being difficult. I held firm on my boundary. I told them I would still see the kids for planned visits, holidays, and special occasions, but I was no longer available for last-minute babysitting or extended stays so Melissa could go party. This caused a massive rift in the family. Melissa barely spoke to me, my parents were cold and distant, and I was painted as the villain at family gatherings. But I felt lighter, freer, no longer trapped in the role of unpaid nanny for someone who didn't appreciate or respect my time and generosity. For about 1.5 years, things were tense but manageable. I focused on my business, dated someone seriously for a while, traveled to places I had always wanted to visit, and generally enjoyed the life I had worked so hard to build. I saw the kids occasionally when Melissa would actually bring them to family events, though she made sure to give me cold glares the entire time, as if I had personally victimized her by refusing to continue enabling her lifestyle. Then, about 6 months ago, my parents called and asked to meet with me for dinner. They said they needed to discuss something important with me and Melissa. I should have known it wasn't going to be good, but I agreed to meet them. At this dinner, my parents dropped a bombshell that left me absolutely speechless. They explained that over the years, they had spent virtually their entire retirement savings supporting Melissa, between paying her rent, covering her bills, buying her cars when she wrecked or lost the ones they had already bought, paying for the kids' expenses, and bailing her out of various financial emergencies. They had gone through over $300,000. Their retirement fund was essentially depleted, and they were now worried about their own financial security as they got older. I felt bad for them initially, but then came the part that made my blood boil. They said they had come up with a solution that would help everyone. They wanted me to buy Melissa a house. Not help with a down payment, not cosign a mortgage, but outright purchase a house that would be put in Melissa's name. Their reasoning was that if Melissa owned her home free and clear, she wouldn't have rent expenses, which would allow her to save money and get on her feet, and it would relieve the financial burden from them. They suggested a budget of around $250,000, which they assured me was very reasonable for the area, and noted that since I had a successful business and no children of my own, I could certainly afford it. I sat there in stunned silence as they outlined this plan like it was the most logical thing in the world. Melissa, sitting across from me, had this expectant look on her face, like she was already picking out paint colors for her new house. When I finally found my voice, I said absolutely not. I explained that I had worked incredibly hard for my money, that I had made responsible choices my entire life, that I had sacrificed and saved while Melissa partied and made terrible decisions, and that I was not going to hand over $250,000 to reward her irresponsibility. I pointed out that giving Melissa a free house wouldn't teach her anything or motivate her to change her behavior. It would just be another massive bailout that allowed her to continue avoiding the consequences of her choices. My parents were shocked by my refusal. My mother started crying, saying she couldn't believe I would be so selfish. That family was supposed to help each other, that I was essentially condemning them and Melissa and the kids to poverty because I was greedy and wanted to hoard my money. My father was angry, saying I had always been judgmental of Melissa, that I looked down on her because she had struggled, and that it was my duty as the more financially successful child to help my sister and, by extension, help them since they had exhausted their resources supporting her. Melissa herself went on a rant about how I had always thought I was better than her, how I had judged her life choices, how I had refused to help with her kids when she needed it, and now I was refusing to help her get housing security. She actually said that I owed her this because I had benefited from being the favorite growing up, which was so absurd I almost laughed. I hadn't been the favorite, I had been the ignored one while all attention and resources went to her. But in Melissa's twisted logic, my success meant I had somehow been advantaged, and therefore I owed her compensation. I stood up to leave, reiterating that I would not be buying Melissa a house, that this conversation was over and that they needed to accept my decision. My father then said something that chilled me to the bone. He told me that if I refused to help Melissa voluntarily, they would have no choice but to pursue legal action against me. He claimed that over the years, they had provided me with various forms of support. Financial help during college that I had never paid back, money for my first car, contributions to my business startup, and that if I added it all up, I owed them easily enough to cover the cost of Melissa's house. He said he had already consulted with a lawyer friend who told him they had a case. I was absolutely floored. The claims were mostly fabricated or wildly exaggerated. Yes, my parents had given me a few $1,000s total over the years. Birthday money, a contribution to my first car that was maybe $2,000. Small amounts here and there that I had always considered gifts, not loans. They had never given me any money for my business. I had funded that entirely through my savings and a small bank loan that I had paid back within 3 years. The idea that these small amounts over decades somehow added up to them having a legal claim for $250,000 was insane. But the threat was real, and it was clear they were serious. I left that dinner shaking with anger and disbelief. I immediately contacted a lawyer to understand my legal position. My attorney reviewed everything and assured me that my parents had absolutely no case. The amounts they claimed to have given me were not documented as loans. There were no signed agreements, no repayment terms, nothing that would hold up in court. Even if they could prove they had given me money, gifts are not legally recoverable, and the statute of limitations on any potential claims would have long since expired. My lawyer told me that if they did try to sue me, it would be frivolous and would likely be dismissed quickly, possibly with sanctions against them for filing a baseless lawsuit. Armed with this information, I sent my parents and Melissa a formal letter from my attorney explaining that I would not be purchasing a house for Melissa, that any lawsuit they filed would be frivolous and would be vigorously defended, and that if they proceeded with legal action, I would countersue for harassment and seek to recover my legal fees. I also made it clear that if they continued to harass me about this matter, I would have no choice but to cut off contact with them entirely. The response was predictably dramatic. My mother called me crying hysterically, saying I was destroying the family, that I was choosing money over my own blood, that she didn't raise me to be so cold and heartless. My father sent me angry text messages about how I was ungrateful for everything they had done for me, how I was abandoning my sister and her children, and how I would regret this decision when they were gone and I had no family left. Melissa posted vague messages on social media about toxic family members and betrayal, clearly trying to rally sympathy from her friends without telling them the full story. Extended family members started reaching out, Some to support me once they heard the full story, others to pressure me to do the right thing and help Melissa. Several of my aunts and uncles told me privately that they had watched this dynamic play out for years, that they had always felt bad for me being taken for granted while Melissa was coddled, and that they were proud of me for finally standing up for myself. Others, particularly relatives on my mother's side who had always favored Melissa, told me I was being selfish and that family should always come first. No matter what, the most painful part of all this was realizing that my parents genuinely believed they were in the right. In their minds, they had sacrificed everything to help Melissa because she needed it, and now it was my turn to step up and sacrifice for the family. They couldn't or wouldn't see that their endless enabling had prevented Melissa from ever learning to support herself, that their favoritism had created this monster of entitlement, or that expecting me to hand over $250,000 was absolutely unreasonable. They had convinced themselves that because I had been responsible and successful, I somehow owed it to the family to subsidize Melissa's lifestyle indefinitely. About 3 months after that disastrous dinner, my parents did actually file a lawsuit against me. True to my lawyer's prediction, it was a mess of vague claims about loans that were never documented, promises that were never made, and emotional arguments about family obligation that had no legal standing. We filed a motion to dismiss, and the judge granted it within 6 weeks, calling the lawsuit frivolous and stating that there was no legal basis for any of their claims. The judge also ordered my parents to pay my legal fees, which totaled about $15,000 by that point. They were furious about this, of course, and blamed me for costing them money they didn't have, completely ignoring the fact that they had initiated the baseless lawsuit. Since then, I have had minimal contact with my parents and Melissa. They occasionally reach out, usually when Melissa is in some new crisis and they think they can guilt me into helping, but I hold firm to my boundaries. I've made it clear that I'm willing to have a relationship with them if they can respect my decisions and stop treating me like a family ATM, but so far they seem incapable of doing that. They continue to enable Melissa, who continues to make poor choices, and they continue to suffer financially as a result. I've offered to help my parents with financial planning, to teach them how to set boundaries with Melissa so she's forced to become independent, but they're not interested. They would rather struggle and resent me than do the hard work of stopping the enabling cycle. The situation with the kids breaks my heart. They're now 9, 11, and 13, and they're growing up with an incredibly unstable mother and grandparents who are financially stressed. I've tried to maintain some relationship with them, sending birthday gifts, offering to help with school expenses directly rather than giving money to Melissa. But my access to them is controlled by Melissa, who uses them as pawns in this family drama. She's told them that their Aunt Jennifer is rich and selfish and doesn't care about them, which couldn't be further from the truth. I've set up small savings accounts for each of them that Melissa doesn't know about, putting money away for their futures, college funds that will be available when they turn 18. But for now, I can't do much more without it being intercepted or used by Melissa for other purposes. Looking back on all of this, I can see so clearly how the patterns were established early and just kept repeating. My parents created a dynamic where Melissa learned that she would always be rescued, that she never had to face real consequences, that someone would always step in to fix her problems. And they created a dynamic where I learned that being responsible meant being taken for granted, that my needs and boundaries were less important than keeping Melissa happy. It took me far too long to break out of that pattern, to stand up for myself and refuse to continue playing the role they had assigned me. Do I feel guilty? Sometimes. I'm human, and I was raised in a family culture that valued self-sacrifice and putting family first. There are moments when I wonder if I should have helped more, if there was some middle ground I missed, if I'm being too harsh. But then I remember the years of free babysitting while Melissa partied, the complete lack of appreciation or respect, the audacity of demanding I buy her a house, the threat of a lawsuit when I refused, and I know I made the right decision. Enabling someone is not the same as helping them. Real help would have been my parents setting boundaries with Melissa years ago, forcing her to stand on her own defeat, allowing her to experience the natural consequences of her choices so she would be motivated to make better ones. I've learned so much from this experience about boundaries, about the difference between guilt and actual wrongdoing, about the importance of protecting yourself even from family members who claim to love you but treat you as a resource to be exploited. I've learned that being the responsible child in a dysfunctional family system often means you become the scapegoat, the one everyone expects to sacrifice and give and fix things while the irresponsible child is coddled and enabled. I've learned that sometimes loving your family means saying no to their unreasonable demands, even when they hate you for it. My life now is peaceful in a way it never was when I was caught up in the family drama. I have friends who respect my boundaries, a business that continues to grow, hobbies and interests I actually have time to pursue, and relationships that are reciprocal rather than one-sided. I'm dating someone wonderful who comes from a healthy family and was absolutely appalled when I told him this story. He's helped me see even more clearly how dysfunctional my family dynamics were, how unreasonable their expectations have always been, and how much happier I am now that I've stepped back from it all. Would I reconcile with my parents and Melissa if they acknowledged their behavior and genuinely changed? Absolutely. I don't hate them. I'm not holding a grudge. I'm simply protecting myself from continued exploitation and unfair treatment. If they could admit that their favoritism hurt me, that their expectations were unreasonable, that their lawsuit was wrong, and commit to treating me with basic respect and fairness going forward, I would be open to rebuilding our relationship. But I'm not holding my breath. People who have spent decades in a pattern of behavior rarely change unless they hit rock bottom and are forced to confront their choices. My parents are still too busy enabling Melissa and blaming me for not joining them in that enabling to do any real self-reflection. For anyone listening to this who is dealing with similar family dynamics, where you're expected to sacrifice endlessly for an irresponsible family member while your own needs are ignored, I want you to know that it's okay to say no. It's okay to set boundaries. It's okay to refuse to fund someone else's poor choices. Being family doesn't give people unlimited rights to your time, money, or emotional energy. You're allowed to live your own life, pursue your own happiness, and protect your own resources. The guilt they throw at you is manipulation, not legitimate moral obligation. You don't owe anyone your financial security just because you made better choices than they did. It's been a hard road, coming to terms with the reality that my family may never give me the love and respect I deserve, that they may always see me as the selfish one because I refuse to bankrupt myself to enable my sister. But I'm at peace with my decisions. I sleep well at night knowing I've been fair, reasonable, and generous within appropriate boundaries. I've offered real help that would actually make a difference, but they only want the kind of help that allows them to continue avoiding responsibility. That's their choice, and I can't control it. All I can control is my own response, my own boundaries, and my own life. My name is Jennifer. I'm 35 years old, and this is the story of how my family tried to make me responsible for my sister's choices and financial rescue, and how I finally said no and meant it. They threatened to sue me, they tried to manipulate me, they attempted to use guilt and family obligation as weapons, but I stood firm. I'm not their ATM, I'm not their backup parent, and I'm not responsible for fixing problems that others created. I'm just a woman who worked hard for what she has and refuses to hand it over to people who refuse to take responsibility for themselves. Thank you for listening, and I hope my story helps someone else find the courage to set boundaries with their own difficult family members.